Gbay, who is one of my favorite YouTube League of Legends esports personalities, put out a tweet today basically asking people, hey, I talked about the LCS, its current state, how I think it might be dying, etc. And nobody really responds to the content itself. So, boy, do I have you covered.
Currently, the North American League of Legends scene, the LCS, is having a disastrous offseason that has some pretty wide-ranging implications that extend far beyond just North America to every region. And I would argue it extends beyond League of Legends as a whole. This is something that could affect essentially every esport. For those of you who have not heard what's going on, I guess we should start off just by talking about the news. Over the course of the past few months, but particularly this past week, there's been loads of announcements about all sorts of negative things for the LCS. In particular, the LCS broadcast crew is losing a lot of its talent. Freak is retiring from casting, Dash was just removed from the broadcast team, and Pastry Time is also moving on from casting as the LCS appears to be trimming down to some sort of skeleton crew. Freak announced his retirement a little while ago to move into game design at Riot, which seems like it might be a pretty positive thing for him, but the other two announcements were weirdly foreboding. Dash announced this past week that he was leaving the crew not of his own volition.
That was the saddening part in all of it, is that I wasn't spoken to prior to the news just being, delivered, like being told that this was what was happening. That would probably be the only piece in the whole puzzle that I think really eats at me.
His text announcement on Twitter stated that apparently the LCS has no need for a consistent host, which honestly feels like a bit of a slap in the face, considering he's done a really good job of hosting the league for almost a decade at this point, literally just winning the Esports Awards Host of the Year for 2022. When this announcement dropped, Twitter naturally freaked out with all of this news, and I myself started commenting on some of it, at which point Pastry Time chimed in, reminding us that he also announced his retirement a little while ago, and he specifically informed...
I remember seeing that tweet when Pastry Time replied. I was like, oh man, I feel bad. Poor Pastry Time gets hung out to dry in almost every scenario, even when he was on broadcast. Like, Replay Files is like the one time where I think he like really got the recognition that he deserved. Other than that, the community just seems to overlook him consistently, which I feel bad for.
To me, that move wasn't entirely voluntary either. You personally, as a viewer, might like or dislike any of these casters. The league scene has very strong opinions on who casts their games, but to see all of them go in the same off-season, not of their own volition, is a really worrying sign about how Riot is looking at the future of the LCS. What's made this even worse is the fact that Riot hasn't made any comment on pretty much any of this. They aren't trying to spin this in a positive new direction.
No,
it's kind of like they know that this spells doom and gloom for the league, and they're hoping to just let the news cycle die out. And these announcements are coming in line with so many other negative announcements that keep on happening with regards to LCS franchises and League of Legends esports as a whole. At this point, there's almost too many stories to reference, but it seems as though every LCS team is scaling back operations for the upcoming year.
I know where he's
Teams
going
are getting hit with layoffs, and esports in general seems to be going through some sort of massive recession.
Okay, well, yeah, she's about to play the clip where Travis talks about the revenue problem.
I feel like
I
showed up and first became aware of the esports scene in around, let's say, 2014. I was very confident esports was going up only.
Yeah.
Do you feel that way still?
No, not at all. Esports has never really made that much money.
But of all the news that's happened recently, I think...
Let's be clear on this. Esports drives a good bit of revenue. It's not that it doesn't. It drives multi-million-dollar deals across various orgs, across the leagues themselves, etc. But it is also very expensive. It is not cheap to get the stadiums, to pay the players. And the players ultimately are the ones that drive value here. There is no offsetting revenue to this extreme amount of cost, despite the million-dollar deals that come in, to make this profitable at the moment. There's no ticket sales. There's no media rights deals. There's no food and beverage deals. Merchandising, people are starting to figure out, but even then, it's more individual creators than the leagues themselves, barring Worlds, which is already profitable, and they kill it on merch. Believe me, the merch stand at Worlds was just, so the international side of LoL Esports has it covered. The the regional side, at least on the LCS, does not.
The scariest thing that's come out is that Riot is moving the LCS time slot. The LCS, yes, which has been broadcast traditionally on Saturdays and Sundays, is going to be moving to Thursdays and Fridays, which isn't that bad on its own. But on top of that, games are now going to be broadcast at 12 noon West Coast time, 3 p.m. East Coast time. That's also with the most important games being broadcast right at the start, right at 12 noon West Coast, 3 p.m. East Coast, which basically means if you are in North America and you have a job or go to school on the weekdays, you will not be able to watch the LCS anymore.
Bingo.
Your domestic league is specifically not going to be viewable to you. This is obviously really frustrating to a lot of people who have rallied out quite a bit at how upset they are, and in general this move doesn't make a lot of sense. It appears as though Riot is kind of trying to make the LCS more viewable to European viewers at the expense of local North American viewers, but
it does make sense because they are targeting viewership. At least from what it seems, they believe that they can drive better sponsorship deals and drive higher revenues for the league by targeting European viewers and boosting up that viewership number, rather than finding other ways to do it with a lower viewership number but cashing in on different revenue streams. That's the difference. So it's intentional, and they don't believe that there's an offsetting difference. So let me put it in the best way that I can. If there's 130, if you believe that you can hit 130,000 concurrent viewers by switching over to the European time zone, or better catering to them, and you're saying that the LCS audience is going to drive 50,000 of that, and 80,000 of that is going to be EU. Whereas, if they kept the current system as is, they believe that that 50,000 LCS number is going to remain the same. And assuming the product is going to be stagnant, assuming they don't think that it's going to keep dropping, then that 50,000 EU number is going to happen. The reason why I think this analogy, they're assuming 100,000 people here. The reason why I think this example is important is because it highlights that they don't think the 50,000 NA number is going to change no matter what they do. They think that the NA audience, for lack of a better term, is unable to be developed into long-term fandom in the same way that European fans and the same way that LCK and LPL fans are. They believe that this 50,000 EU number can go to 80, whereas this 50,000 NA number will not improve. Do I agree with that logic? No. But clearly it's what they're thinking.
But that's a really worrying thing to see. Traditionally, esports have been much more popular in Europe than they have in North America, and I can see why it might make a bit of business sense to try to cater more to those viewers. But I don't know if the LCS can survive without local North American viewers and players watching. I mean, can you imagine if another sport did this? Could you imagine if the...
Okay, I think this is an important distinction to make when people are like, I don't know if it can survive. It can, because esports survive on smaller budgets, smaller scales. It just can't survive in the current state that we think it is. It has to be reduced. It has to shrink. It has to drop down to a much lower level than what it is now. Call of Duty has had less viewership for a much longer period of time, with less sponsors, with less support from the developers and everything else around it, and yet it still exists. Smash has been neglected by the developers, has been penalized by Nintendo for years, and yet it still exists. The difference is that you just can't make a sustainable career out of it. Call of Duty, obviously you can. But Smash, I'm saying, unless you're a content creator, in addition to that, you can't just be a pro player. And the industry won't fill up stadiums. And we are getting to the point where League is shrinking down to that level, whereas League was the outlier for a long period of time, at least in North America.
Bundesliga in Germany specifically scheduled all of its matches to be at prime time viewing hours for Brazil, because the only way that they thought they could make their league survive was with a strong Brazilian viewer base. That's the equivalent of what the LCS is doing right now in North America. Now, most people might not look at this and say that it's necessarily anything all that bad, because the LCS, frankly, has been due for some form of regression. Yes. Bluntly put, the LCS has not been putting forward a good product in recent years. There's not really any reason someone should watch the LCS. Of course, if you're choosing to watch the LCS, you aren't really seeing high-quality professional League of Legends, at least compared to the other regions and domestic leagues in the world, as we have seen consistently with all of the poor international performances that NA has given at pretty much every international event.
You're performing
the LCS
better than the minor
isn't
regions,
necessarily unique in strategy or personality. There's nothing particularly entertaining about this league compared to every other, since most of the biggest names and most entertaining personalities in the region have opted for streaming careers rather than trying to go pro themselves. Really, the only reason anyone would watch LCS over every other domestic league that they have available to them would be if you had some sort of connection to North America. If you are from the region, perhaps, you might want to see the local North American players. They will not be the best in the world, but you might be curious about who the best players are in NA. Good luck with that. If you somehow didn't know, the NALCS has so few local players at this point, it's essentially a joke. About half of the players rostered by teams are not from North America at this point. And of the 3 teams that were sent to Worlds last year representing North America for the North American LCS, of the 15 starters, only 3 of them were actually from NA. Every other player was an imported talent from other regions. So yeah, the LCS has been in desperate need of some sort of revamp for a long time. And these changes, in theory, could be Riot trying to take the league in some sort of a new direction. But if that's the case, the execution that they've been giving has been entirely horrible, flawed, every bad adjective you can imagine. It's been an unmitigated disaster.
The lack of communication,
and in my opinion, esports and League of Legends really needs to pay attention to the LCS, because in many ways, the LCS is the canary in the coal mine. So if you're unfamiliar with the phrase, before modern technology, people that worked in mines used to always take a small caged bird down with them, a canary, whenever they went down to work. This was because canaries have really quick breathing rhythms while also being really, really light. So if there were ever to be something that went wrong, like a carbon monoxide leak, the canary would die from carbon monoxide poisoning almost immediately. This could then serve as a warning to the miners that they were in serious danger. Something has gone wrong, and they should all evacuate immediately, hopefully before any other loss of life, apart from the poor little bird. Now, I think the LCS is something that provides a lot of value because in many ways, they are the weak link. The LCS is the canary in the coal mine that everyone should pay attention to, because if something goes wrong in esports, the LCS will be the first signifier to let everybody know. And God forbid, if the LCS dies, I think that's going to send everybody running for the exits.
No, I don't think it will. Here's why. Activision has never treated Call of Duty as a product that is going to be like, you never hear them talking about profitability ever. Why? Because I guarantee the COD League, I don't know actually no, I'm not even going to guess on their finances whatsoever. But it is understood that Activision just treats the Call of Duty League as a marketing tool, and that is it. They are not aimed at becoming this massive, like, fill out stadiums, esport, like, standalone product where we have the Yankees versus the Reds. Like, no, it is marketing for Activision. Like, and everybody in the COD community kind of like accepts that and knows it. It's like we are beholden to Riot, or not Riot, to Activision, and that just is what it is. The difference between the two is that Riot has made it very clear that they want the LCS and esports in general to be standalone profitable, that the money does matter. It's not just marketing to them, because I'd imagine they could sit here and say, well, our money's better off marketing the game by releasing Arcane Season 2. Like, we have better marketing tools available to us than other companies do. So we don't need esports in the same capacity. So I think it's different because the expectations of the LCS are different than any other esports league by a wide margin. Valve doesn't give a shit whether CSGO is profitable or sustainable long term. It just is what it is. If people like the CSGO, it is relying on third-party systems and the orgs themselves, and the developer has no say. Like, they throw in a few million here or there, but that's it. If Riot's losing money because Riot is controlling the league here, Riot has a fiscal interest in making sure that this succeeds, or they're willing to cut the cord more than other people.
To better explain this, though, let's go ahead and rewind a little bit and talk about what it is that makes the LCS significant in the first place. Esports has always had this big problem holding it back, which is that gaming has evolved way too quickly for competitive gaming to ever become a real thing. I think it's fair to say we as fans want to see gaming competitions with players who are just paid to compete professionally, the same as traditional sports. We want to see people who are able to devote their lives to their talents.
I want to be entertained.
The most entertaining and intense performances imaginable. We love these games and love seeing how far they can be pushed by a human being, so in an ideal esports world, someone shouldn't have to worry about going back to work a day job in between tournaments. But for almost all of esports' 50-year history, that's always been the case. Competitors have rarely been able to make a real living off of just playing games professionally. For someone to make a half-decent income doing that just through competition alone, they would have to support themselves exclusively off of the prize money given out to victors at most events, meaning you would basically have to win every single tournament you attended just to pay your bills. Across esports history, there have been some people able to do that, but of course not many.
That's why you diversify your revenue streams. Content is an additional revenue stream that provides you stability.
Most esports competitors have had to resort to some other form of side career to help support themselves. Sometimes that means having a day job, sometimes that means working as an entertainer essentially with live streams in between practices, or maybe running a website or some other related gaming business. All of this is largely because there's never been a true esports league that's been able to generate enough money to pay players for competing alone the way traditional sports do.
Why? Why? Because we are not culturally there yet. It is not accepted in North America in the way that it is other places.
Esports leagues have been set up many times over the course of history, and some of them have been really great competitions, but it's rare to ever find true year-long professional leagues that have been able to survive more than a decade. When people try to set up leagues, they always run into a litany of problems. Tournament organizers might run into licensing issues with a game's developers. They might struggle to keep an audience's attention with sequels to titles being released. Even in the rare circumstance where a game develops a pro league with players who are paid salaries and millions of fans eager to watch, it always feels like a matter of time before the ever-evolving nature of video games pushes this league out of existence. This has always kept professional gaming from ever really being professional. It's always been more of a niche hobby than a career. This has always been a really frustrating, ever-present problem in esports, and it's what the LCS model was finally able to change.
Today is the day, the official start of the League of Legends Championship Series.
Was
it,
though?
This is a groundbreaking moment in league history as 8 North American teams take their
Initially,
first steps on the way to the Summoners Cup.
The LCS model was meant to solve all of this, structuring league esports like a true sports league. 8 teams, eventually expanding to 10, would play in a yearly seasoned competition, same as any other traditional sport, with a regularly structured playoff crowning champions at the end. Players were finally guaranteed salaries just to play the game, no more worrying about being an entertainer on the side to actually make a living, or having to retire if you don't win enough prize money from your next event.
That union, by the way, is still not a legal union.
Fans could be certain of when and where to watch their favorite teams play, with regularly scheduled programming that was easy to find and follow. And to finish it all off, of course, there was still a major international event at the end of every year, which would pit the best teams from every region against each other to crown a world champion in a big celebration of all the competition year-round. Now, this structure was not perfect. Make no mistake, it had many flaws. There were way fewer international competitions occurring compared to the previous open circuit, which wasn't super enjoyable since League had really become a global esport already. Regular season games were also way less meaningful than tournaments of old, since losing a single tournament didn't automatically end an organization's existence or players' careers the way it did before, which was obviously pretty shitty for players, but it admittingly brought a lot of exciting stakes to previous events. And lastly, most of the domestic leagues across the world in the LCS model's first few years always seemed to see the same few teams winning every single split, never really being all that competitive, which made leagues feel pretty predictable and somewhat boring. But the LCS model provided stability, which was something that esports desperately needed. Having a centralized league meant we could finally build some infrastructure that could last for decades to come. One centralized league meant a central authority to negotiate and sell ad space on broadcasts. It meant a single monolithic entity that could negotiate multi-year deals for hundreds of hours of airtime. This sort of thing is a huge source of revenue in traditional sports, and now with the LCS model, we finally had an opportunity to bring it to esports. Of course, we call it the LCS model, but it really isn't unique to North America.
Okay, but that's the thing. Like this right here. It never happened. And still hasn't happened.
To bring it to esports. Of course, we call it the LCS model, but it really isn't unique to North America. It spans globally, as every region around the world has now set up their own domestic year-long league to build their own infrastructure. Each league has been able to collectively work together to create content with teams and players, building a brand on what they want to be, attracting advertisers and hype surrounding their specific league, and maybe most importantly, each region now has an opportunity to sell their broadcasting rights. The number one source of revenue for traditional sports has always been the collective broadcasting rights that a league will sell to a variety of TV networks. These deals normally last for decades and can be worth multiple billions of dollars. That kind of long-term financial infrastructure is what the world of esports desperately needed, except that's also when everything started falling apart.
One of the reasons why traditional sports is a little, not recession-proof, but a little more recession-resistant is because, you have organizations like the NFL that have long-term, multi-billion-dollar broadcast deals that feed.
Okay, here's an important breakdown because, for full disclosure, to those that don't know, I've worked at Viacom CBS whenever we were renegotiating our deal with the NFL. The reason why the NFL is so important to these networks is not the football product itself. You're 9 times out of 10, you are paying more money than you can sell ad slots for, and you are operating at a loss with football. I don't think either CBS or Fox, I know CBS at the time, I don't know about Fox, I don't think either are turning a profit on football. But the important thing is that you can use that to feed into other programming. The thing that you put right after football drives an insane amount of viewership, an insane amount of ad dollars on just normal television program, and can also build up a show from the ground up. Think about Big Bang Theory is one of the biggest shows of all time. Where did they initially slot it? Right after 2.5 Men. Why? Because 2.5 Men was the most watched comedy on television. You take a big audience and you lead it into a new show and hopefully develop it into something, which then becomes your cash cow for the next 10 years, which is exactly what happened with Big Bang Theory. Sunday after NFL, similar thing. It's what you do with that loss and utilize it and use it as a way to drive revenue elsewhere.
Most of the teams, even if they're not filling stadiums. Is there a future you see with esports where that's going to happen?
I'm probably more of a negative Nancy when it comes to this, but I think media rights are worth zero, right? Like zero is probably hyperbolic, but it's not worth anything, right? There's only a couple players out there, and they're not looking to bid a lot of dollars for this stuff.
It turns out streaming rights are worth next to nothing, at least compared to television deals. YouTube and Twitch aren't paying out billions of dollars
because
to broadcast the LCS.
They don't need the LCS
Every league
to
found this
feed
out as
into
they began
anything.
negotiating deals with their own domestic streaming services. No broadcasting rights meant relying more on sponsorships, but State Farm halftime shows can only pay so much. So that means teams relied more on individual sponsorships, individual ad impressions, individual streaming numbers, and before long we're back in the old system of teams caring more about promoting themselves as a brand or a company than they actually care about competition. What was really interesting about this model was the fact that everybody suffered from these problems, even the best teams in the world and the ones that consistently saw the most success.
Yep.
For most of League of Legends history, South Korea has been the best region in the world, and its domestic league, the LCK, has been the best competition. Everyone was reminded of this at 2020 Worlds when Korea had 2 of its top teams fighting in grand finals to win their 7th Summoners Cup, giving them more world championships than every other region combined. But even with all of that success, this past offseason, the LCK has been losing sponsorships. Even the best region in the world, with all of their titles and glory, are struggling financially right now. Former LCK commentator and player Cloud Templar highlighted this very potently on a stream recently, where he went so far as to say, after the World Championship, the LCK this year spent so big that if we didn't do well at this year's Worlds, it would have been a crisis. The LCS model has brought a ton of success and stability in the world of professionalizing esports, but recently it started to look like this might just be a house of cards that's about to come tumbling down. That's what's so worrying about Riot showing signs of restructuring the LCS, and why I say it's a canary in the coal mine, because if the LCS, League's weakest link, begins showing signs that something is seriously wrong, you need to fix that carbon monoxide leak ASAP, because if it dies, that's going to send everyone else running for the exits. The prospect of that happening makes me unbelievably sad, because I have spent the past 10 years of my life following these stories for a professional career, and being someone who is also a pretty big traditional sports fan.
I was going to say, I noticed the Mets thing in the background.
That these stories and these players are no less impressive or less deserving for all of the incredible accomplishments they achieve. These players are doing incredible things and taking insane risks for their careers. They work harder than most athletes do and get rewarded so much less as it is. They're putting every waking moment of their lives into this game and deserve to have their accomplishments put on stage with their stories shared across the globe. Personally speaking, I think that a lot of the players and stories in esports, and specifically in League of Legends in these past 10 years, are unbelievably exciting, and they should be given an even larger stage. I would be heartbroken if we went back to perpetual niche status, where the only people that could even have a semblance of a professional career is someone who goes off and wins literally every tournament they attend. The LCS model may be broken in many ways, and it may need to change. It may need to reinvent itself or do something to keep itself around, but I really hope that it sticks around and that we continue having these opportunities for players to continue dedicating their lives to competition, because that's what, I mean, that's when sports are at their best. Now, thankfully, I think there is a little bit of a silver lining here. Recently, the CEO of Gen.G, Arnold, mentioned with a comment about the LCK losing sponsors that the one nice thing about the situation right now is that at least everyone's on the same page that something needs to change. Travis Gafford also put out a great video recently, linked below, talking about how Riot doesn't want the LCS to die. They are not intentionally trying to kill the league.
It would be very damaging for their ego if the sport that takes place across the street from their headquarters dies in the home region of the company. Like, that is not something that they are down for. They would not allow for that to happen without putting up a fight. They wouldn't choose
without putting up a fight
like,
is a key word.
Fuck it, let's move on from League of Legends.
Because I think ultimately, if it was the right fiscal
and
decision,
professional league esports model probably does need to change if it's ever going to survive. There is will for change to happen. I guess in a worst case scenario, even if the LCS does continue to lose viewership, and if all these changes are for the worse, and we continue seeing things go downhill until there's some sort of eventual closure and a return to an open circuit tournament format. I guess even in that scenario, we can take solace in the fact that there's always going to be competitors out there eager to compete, and the scene is rife with
there's
all
always
sorts of
be
talented
content.
people who are eager to put on tournaments, eager to help people find careers here, and hopefully eager to share these stories with everybody, because there really is a lot out there, and I think it deserves a stage. On that note, though, I hope you guys enjoyed your holiday season. I will be back with a new documentary.
Hope you did too, Gbay. Look, the important part here is that let me exit out. The important part is that content will always be around. And unfortunately, as highlighted here, as Arnold said, and others have as well, the additional revenue streams that we want to bring in are just not there. Especially for sports, the big one in media rights. We drive no value relative to other content creators. The landscape has changed. We need to model ourselves as content creators, whether people like it or not. Like, we are ultimately producing content. It is not about sports. It is not about the highest level of competition, despite how much we want to see that. We could be the most entertaining and highest competitive level game in the world, but if it does not drive a profit and does not drive value for others, it's not going to matter. So you have to look at yourself in a way as content creators, because that's ultimately what everything in gaming and esports is. And until you can find other ways to drive revenue streams, we're in for a very rude awakening. That's all I can really say. I don't know how to view this any other way other than that. Which sucks as somebody who wants to get into this space and eventually get involved with esports in some capacity in a professional manner. I would love to, but the writing is not great on the wall. But we'll see. Trying my best to help overcome it. I know Gbay is as well. Thank you for the video. Appreciate it. And hopefully, I don't know what context this adds, but maybe it's useful in some way.